Hello. So I had a question or a subject that kind of came up on social media relating to one of the books that I'd written, Pagan Portals to the Morrigan, Meeting the Great Queens. And, it was just sort of expressed initially by one person, but also by several people, that they found it confusing and sort of difficult to conceptualize who the Morrigan was, the various names connected to her, and the various relationships, which is totally fair. It's a very complicated subject. It's a complicated subject in mythology, and a lot of it is things that we don't necessarily have clear or direct answers on. It's material that we have one source saying one thing, another source saying another thing, so it can be very contradictory, and I understand how this is confusing. It's particularly confusing to people who are sort of used to classical mythology as it's presented, particularly in schools here in the US, and other sorts of material where we're usually given very clear and direct concepts. So this person's father is this person's mother is this is who this person is. And in the Irish, we don't necessarily have that clarity. And part of the reason for that, just so we're all on the same page, is that it's highly likely that originally there was a lot of regional variation. I find that a lot of people, particularly who've ever been to Ireland or are not too familiar with Ireland's history and Ireland itself, tend to perceive it as just one sort of homogenous big culture. And the reality is, it, like every place else, is very regional. And every region would have its own version of stories, and this is true into recent folklore as well, by the way, would have their own versions of stories, their own understandings of different deities. And what happened when a lot of this was written down, particularly in the Leabhar Éireann, the Book of Invasions of Ireland, is that all of this diverse and often contradictory material was taken and they attempted to make it cohesive. And the result is not necessarily that cohesive. Also important to understand that in a lot of these myths and stories, we don't have just one version. The Cahmai being an exception to that, but generally speaking, for all of these myths and stories, the Ulster cycle, the Tambo Cooley, Cahmai Conga, the first battle of the Plain of Pillars, pick a story, effectively, the Leabhar Éireann itself, we have multiple redactions, and redactions are basically different versions of the stories. Some of those versions are very contradictory, and that is sort of where some of these problems come in. So I wanted to preface everything by kind of establishing all of that. There is not necessarily going to be a ton of easily understood clarity with some of this material. That all said, though, there is some that is clear and that we do have some pretty solid information on. It's not all just, complete anarchy, so to speak. So, talking about the Morrigan, sort of a really quick crash course in who she is and who she's connected to. We see the name as Morrigan is kind of the most common anglicized modern version. Morrigan would be the modern Irish. The older Irish would be closer to like Morrigan, with a little bit of that G still in there for Rihan. This is all my best attempt at saying these, by the way. I do obviously have an accent in both Irish and Old Irish, bear that in mind. So, Mor is a little complicated to parse. There's a couple possible meanings. The two main meanings that scholars sort of debate back and forth are either great, which would be more, or if you don't have the fada, if you don't have the accent mark over the O, mur, would be sort of connected to the idea of the dead, specters, phantoms, spirits of the deceased, and otherworldly spirits. So the second part, Rihan, is very straightforward. It just means queen or noble lady. So we have either great queen or queen of specters, basically. Like I said, this is the crash course here. So that's what the name means. We run into our first difficulty in that it is a name and a title. So you do see the title applied to other clearly named goddesses. Just kind of have to roll with that. Usually though, you will see them referred to as like Bive, that is the Morrigan, or Bive, who is called Morrigan, something along those lines. So it's pretty clear when they're talking about a separate goddess being given that title. We do also have an individual deity who is the Morrigan. In Morrigan would be the older Irish. You do also see her name, I should say, sometimes as Morrigu, with a U on the end. It's just a grammatical variation of the name. It doesn't indicate anything particular. It's not the personal name versus the title, none of that. Old Irish and modern Irish, the grammar is very different from English, so it's just a different case, different version of it. That is important to keep in mind, because I have seen some modern sources that try to say that Morrigu is like the personal name and then Morrigan is the title. No, it just doesn't work that way. So what is the Morrigan's personal name is a common question. If we know that the name itself is a title, it makes a person wonder, then what is her actual personal name? Basically, we don't know. It's possible that she doesn't have one. We do see other deities, Boin, Brige, that they don't necessarily have a known personal name. The name that we have for them is effectively a title, or is perceived to be a title, and we don't know what their personal name would be. So it's possible that this is the case with the Morrigan, that we just don't know what the actual name is. She just goes by the title. We do have some references, and these are from the Levaqual Aaron, which, as I said, is complicated and problematic as a source because it's so contradictory, that states that her personal name is Anu. It appears in the text as Anan, and again, this is a grammatical issue in Older Irish. Anan grammatically can't exist as a name. It doesn't work as a name. So scholars have kind of reconstructed it to what they feel it should be as a name in the nominative case, which would be Anu. So you see the same thing with Danu, by the way, of Tuatha Danann. Danann, it appears as a name, but it grammatically can't exist in that case as a personal name. So they just reconstructed it to Danu. We'll get back to that in a minute. So we have Anu as one potential personal name for the Morrigan. This is based on a couple versions of the Levaqual Aaron that state that the Morrigan, that is Anu. In other words, the Morrigan whose name is Anu. We do, however, have another version, because of course we do, that says Anu is the Morrigan's sister, that she is the seventh daughter of the Morrigan's mother. So I tend to think Anu is probably the most likely candidate for the Morrigan's first name, if we have one, based on the evidence, but it is true that we have some evidence supporting it and some contradicting it. Now, I had mentioned Danu before and said we'd get back to that. Danu is another name in the Levaqual Aaron that is applied to the Morrigan. That it said in some cases that the Morrigan's name is Danu, or the Morrigan that is Danu. I'm personally really skeptical. I'm particularly skeptical of this one, just because we do have examples of Danu showing up particularly in for example, the Bantenchis, the lore of women, the Morrigan and Danu show up in the same place. They also do so, I believe, in the Cathcart Moytura, the first battle of Moytura. So we kind of see this idea that they could be the same, and then immediately contradicting it in other sources, which is why I warned you at the beginning that the sources can be like this. I personally think that Danu is very unlikely as a name for the Morrigan. If you're asking if Anu and Danu are the same name, you will see some people and even occasionally some scholars who suggest that they are. That Danu is a confusion for Da-Anu, goddess Anu. I don't think so. A lot of scholars don't think so either. The names mean different things. Anu means abundance, Danu means flowing. Danu is definitely an Indo-European goddess. We see her sort of across all the way back into India. Goddesses with this name or connected to this name show up. And we see her in Welsh. We see her, the Danube River is named after her. So I'm just really skeptical then that that's a name that's so strongly attested basically across the continent would have been in Ireland a misunderstanding of another name. I don't think so. But I will put it out there that that is a theory, that is a possibility. Some people do say that. So keep it in mind. Another also sort of controversial possibility coming to us from the Liverpool Aaron, of course, is that the Morrigan's first name is actually Brige. Brigid would be the anglicized. Brige, of course, is one of the most well-known Irish goddesses, goddess of the forge and poetry and healing, etc., etc. There is a part of the Liverpool Aaron that suggests that Brige is the Morrigan. There's also some confusion in that there are 3 sons who are said in one area to belong to the Morrigan, to be the Morrigan sons, that are very widely elsewhere said to be Brige's children. So it's complicated, basically. Again, I'm really skeptical of that particular one, but I am putting it out there when we talk about the Morrigan's first name and who she might be. Keep it in mind. And I realize this is all super confusing. The biggest thing to really remember with all of this is that Morrigan is a title and a name, that it's a title that's applied to a couple other goddesses, but it's also a personal name of one particular goddess. I really wouldn't worry too much about what the Morrigan's personal name is. It's more something to keep in mind that she has some connections to Anu, Danu, and Brige in these sources. Food for thought, if you will. I don't think it's super important for us to know the answer to that particular question. So that kind of covers very quickly the Morrigan. Her mother is Ernmas. Ernmas in Old Irish means iron death. Good times. I find that helps me remember the name. Ernmas, iron death. There you go. Her father is Delbeth. He was one of the kings of the Tuatha Dé Danann at one point. So, you know, just that aspect of it, who her parents are, is pretty clear. I don't think that's contradicted anywhere in any of the stories. Mother is Ernmas. That's actually repeated across multiple sources. Her father is Delbeth. She has 3 sisters who are the sovereignty goddesses of Ireland, Fatla, Bonva, and Eru. She has 2 other sisters who form a little triad with her. These are the 3 Morrigan, and that is Macha, Baive, and the Morrigan, whatever her personal name is. And she may or may not have a 7th sister named Anu. Again, depending on whether we believe Anu is the Morrigan's first name or whether we believe she's another daughter of Ernmas. Dealer's choice on that one. She may also have 3 brothers through her father, but the sources being what they are, they could also be her sons. Or they could be her sons with her father, depending on which redaction we're reading. And those would be Brian, Uhuar, and Uhar. This is where the connection with Brige comes in, because those are also named as the children of Turin, and the three children of Turin in multiple sources are said to be the sons of Brige. So that gets super, super complicated. In the Levenworld Aaron, they're said to be the sons of Delbeth with the Morrigan, his daughter. Mythology is what it is. I won't say anything else about that. But elsewhere, they're said to be the three sons of Turin, potentially, according to several sources, with Brige. So, again, you kind of make up your own mind as to which version you believe there. The Morrigan herself is said to have potentially three sons. Again, this is through the Levenworld Aaron, Glon, Gem, and Koskar. They're really only ever mentioned in that one reference, and you never see them again that I know of. So they're very obscure figures. We don't know who their father is. Whether they are or not her sons, we don't know. I believe this is the connection where Danu comes in, that other places in the Levenworld Aaron mentions those three as the sons of Danu. Again, I don't know. They're contradictory sources. It's possible all of this represents different regional areas that believed different things. So in one part of Ireland, they may have believed that Brian, Uhuar, and Uhar were the sons of the Morrigan and Delbeth, whereas in other places they were the sons of Turin and Brige. It just depended on basically where you lived, what version of the story you would have learned, if that makes sense. So there's also a reference in the Silva Gadelica to her having 52 children who were warriors. The way the text reads, though, it's entirely possible that these were actually warriors that were dedicated to her and not physical children. 26 men and 26 women. So take that as you will. Probably her most famous child is Micha. Micha was said to have been born with 3 serpents in his heart, and that if they grew and basically burst forth from his body, they would lay waste to all of Ireland. So he had to be killed, and he was, and that we see that in the Dinhenches of Berba, the River Berba, Barrow, the River Barrow, sorry, is the modern anglicized name. It's an interesting story. We really only see the Morrigan referenced as his mother. She doesn't really show up anywhere else in that particular Dinhenches. But it's something to keep in mind, and that's probably her most well-known child. She also had a daughter named Adair. Adair would mean kind of roughly like from the oak, of the oak. Again, obscure. It's like a single reference to her, also in the Dinhenches, I believe. This was her child with the Dagda. The Dagda, according to multiple sources, the Kavmai Torah, Dinhenches, I think there's one other, but it's escaping me at the moment. The Dagda is her husband. So the Morrigan does have a husband. It is the Dagda. And they do have at least one child together. There are hints that there may be others, but the mythology doesn't clearly name who the fathers are, or who the mother is, and so on. So we don't know for sure. But we do know that the Dagda was her husband. That's actually pretty clear in multiple sources. And we do know that she definitely has these children, Adair, Micha, and these 52 warriors that are said to be her children. That's the later Finian cycle material. And then she potentially has these 2 groupings of 3 sons from the Levenworld Aaron, who are also said to be the sons of other people. So that's a little more up in the air. I think this is about as clear as I can make this particular aspect of the material. I realize that's not necessarily super clear. There are multiple other goddesses who are associated with her. Nevin is probably the most well-known, thanks to Hennessy's ancient Irish war goddess. A lot of people think that Nevin is the name of the Morrigan. There's actually nothing in mythology that supports that. Nevin is actually never called the Morrigan anywhere in any of the myths. But she is a war goddess, and she is associated with Bive, who's the Morrigan's sister, and so we do see this connection. Certainly in modern understandings, Nevin is very strongly connected to the Morrigan. We also see Faye, who's another Irish war goddess, connected to Morrigan. I mentioned Briege earlier. You will see sources saying that the Morrigan is Briege's mother with the Dagda. There's nothing in mythology that actually supports that, but the two goddesses definitely do have some connections. You will see sources saying Anya is the Morrigan. That mostly comes from Lady Gregory, I believe, in her book, whose name just completely flew out of my brain. But in her book, which is actually a retelling of the myths, so there's a little creative license going on. It is possible that in the 19th century, in that area of Ireland, in the southwestern area, where Anya is the most well known, that people were associating her with the Morrigan, or were claiming that Anya was the name of the Morrigan, potentially as a confusion with Anu. I don't know. But there's really nothing in Anya's mythology that directly supports her being the Morrigan. I just mention it because you will run across the idea, and there is that more modern connection between them. Trying to think of who else would immediately come to mind in connection with the Morrigan. I think we've touched on all the main points. Quick recap. So we have the Morrigan, whose first name we don't know for sure. Potentially might be Anu or Danu, or less likely Briege, according to the mythology. Most likely we simply just do not know what her first name is. She has two sisters, Macha and Bive. The three of them together form on Trí Morrigna, the three Morrigans. We see them acting together a lot. They have three other sisters, the sovereignty goddesses of Ireland, Eru, Fotla, and Banba. Potentially a seventh sister, Anu. We don't know. Their parents are Ernmas and Delbeth. The Morrigan's husband is the Dagda. She definitely has a daughter with him named Adair. She has a son named Mechia with an unknown father. She's said to be the mother of these 52 warriors in the Silvic Delica. Possibly just people dedicated to her, we don't know. And then we have these possible but contradictory references to her as the mother of three sons, Glon, Gim, and Koskar, with an unknown father, who are also attributed elsewhere to Danu. And then with Delbeth, who is her own father, Brian, Ichabar, and Uhar, who are, of course, in many other places, referred to as the children of Turin. There's an entire tale based around the children of Turin, by the way. The Ohe Turin, sad fate of the children of Turin. And usually in some of the other material, Briege is said to be their mother. So those two groupings of the three sons, I don't put a lot of stock in those, but you will run across the references, so you should be aware. And that kind of sums up everything I can think of about who the Morrigan might be and who she's connected to and how. Yes, this is all very confusing. Yes, it's contradictory. Like I said, keep in mind, a lot of this is probably regional beliefs, regional variations. So, you know, it's okay to personally choose one approach with this. You know, if you believe that Anu is her first name, if you believe that Danu is her first name, just be aware that it's going to be something that people will disagree with and sort of debate. It's the endless debate what the Morrigan's first name actually is. No one knows. And it's perfectly fine to just go with the Morrigan and you don't know what her first name is and it doesn't bother you. That's good too. So, I hope this video helped clear up a little bit I know sometimes it's easier hearing it as opposed to reading it. If you feel like reading it would be easier, this is all in the book that I mentioned at the beginning, Pagan Portals, the Morrigan. You can also find it various places around online. You can also read the source material. If you're interested in the source material on this particular information, you would want to look into the Leabhar Gabála Éireann, the Book of the Invasions of Ireland, the Cet Cath Moytura, which is the first battle of the Plain of Pillars, or the first battle of Moytura, the Cath Moytura, the Battle of the Plain of Pillars, or the Battle of Moytura, the Ben Henchis, the Lore of Women, Din Henchis, place name stories, specifically Osras, Burba, and Tara. There's a couple in the Tara stories that talk about her and the Dagda. There's some interesting information there that comes up that's worth looking into. The Silva Gadelica, as I mentioned, I think that kind of covers most of the important source material that this is coming from. So there you go. If you have any questions, please drop a link in the video comments and I will try to get to them. But hopefully this helps clarify at least a little bit of what's going on with all of this. Okay? Bye, everybody.